Also, around the time I was thinking about this is weird, I think, well, I guess, you know, I didn't use sunscreen when I was growing up. So it's about, I guess, you know, 78. Well, about the time I went to medical school, we start sunscreen. Air conditioning becomes commonly available, computer, television, and we tell everybody to go inside. So, I guess the vitamin D epidemic might actually, wow, this guy says his sleep is better. Could vitamin D have anything to do with sleep? So what I spent my Christmas last year doing is I go into the computer and I say, has anybody written about vitamin D and sleep? Well, the answer is no. Except where it did lead me to was, where are the vitamin D receptors in the brain? Now, why would they be in the brain in the first place? I think that's weird, but let's read that. It turns out that there are vitamin D receptors in the brain, in that little stripe that I've been pointing to for the last 6 years, looking like an idiot with my little model, saying something is badly wrong here. Now, if I only had this, and I had no explanation of why it was there, I would not be here today talking to you. However, here's what really happens. It's not a vitamin, and the guy I'm going to introduce you to, named Walter Stumpf, actually explained what this chemical is for in every animal on the planet in 1982. He put together everything I'm going to tell you. The only thing he didn't tell was the sleep because he didn't know it. But the sleep fits into this much bigger picture that makes a lot of sense. So it turns out we make vitamin D from cholesterol on our skin. As soon as you say that, my first thought is, oh, does that mean when my vitamin D is low, my cholesterol goes up? Good question. Nobody knows the answer to that. But we certainly do have an epidemic of high cholesterol over the last 40 years that we told everyone to go inside. Two, every animal on the planet makes this exact same chemical. Birds, furry animals, fish, reptiles, insects, the exact chemical we make on our skin. We all make it from the sun. Why would we make it from the sun? What would it have to do with sleep? This guy, Walter Stumpf, is a brilliant scientist. He started into steroid research. He wanted to know where the steroid hormones affected the cell. Very difficult stuff because steroid hormones go into the cell, they sit on the nucleus, and they go into the nucleus and they make the DNA express certain proteins. They actually affect what our cells do, what proteins they make. Because it's inside the cell, very difficult to show where they are, and you have to have a perfectly normal hormone, make it go into the cell, hit its receptor, and go in and do its action. Here are just some of the beginnings of his articles. Starting in 1979, he starts to write articles by organ system, showing you where the vitamin D receptors are. Now, because he comes into it through the steroid hormones, not through the vitamins, he isn't polluted by the idea that this is a vitamin. He knows about steroid hormones better than anyone. He knows, like every layperson knows, if it's a hormone, what's the level? If it's a hormone, it's got 100 effects all over my whole body. He goes into it with that, and he begins to realize that he actually comes up with an idea about why it's there and why it's there on every animal. He also wants to know why would we have a steroid hormone that would be made from UVB light? Why not infrared? Why not ultraviolet? Why not visible light? Turns out that UVB is this narrow wavelength that, because of the tilt of the planet, is the only wavelength that's there in summer and not in winter. This is a hormone that has existed since we climbed out of the water and wandered away from the equator. Because every single one of us animals in this room had to deal with, we don't now, but we did have to deal with, 6 months of summer and 6 months of winter. Now we have completely divorced what the vitamin D level is from the food that we have. But up until the last 500 years, there was no food in the winter. Everything Dr. Perkins told you about the metabolism, what we did in the winter was we didn't eat. And when we didn't eat, and you can find a way to not eat very much and put on fat, you're going to survive until the next spring. So it turns out that these are the GI tract. What you do with your calories, how you eat, how much you can dissolve is all very much related to whether or not you'll survive through the winter. Can you eat enough and dissolve enough that you can build your body in the summer so that you can actually plant, till, and harvest 80 acres? You find a way to do that, and you'll survive. You'll be one of the ones that made babies, that were your grandparents. So here's the high D message, and here's the right level for high D. You can eat 10,000 calories in a day. How do we know this? Because Texas actually has rural forebears. You actually have people that you know in your life that ate a huge pile of food for lunch and laid down for a nap afterwards like it was no big deal. None of us in this room can do that now. My husband's grandfather was out picking cotton with him when he was 7 and his grandfather was 72 in 100-degree weather for 6 weeks. Nobody can do that anymore. My patients are so weak, they get heart failure at 35. This chemical has applications not just to bone, it builds every single tissue in our body. There are vitamin D receptors in the anterior horn cell that builds the muscle, vitamin D receptors in the ovaries, in the testicles, in the fallopian tubes. It has allowed us to be linked, our reproductive system is linked to the sun. If you get horny in September and everybody mates at the fertility rites that happen at the end of the summer, that baby will be born in June. Vitamin D is not a vitamin. It's not in the food anywhere. That's why the government put it in the food. If it had been in the food, they wouldn't have had to supplement it. It's a hormone. We make it. It's only available from the sun. That means your baby's born in June, that baby will grow, be strong, and get through the first year of life. The baby born in December has 6 months before any D becomes available. That means you have 8 kids, the ones born in June are the ones that survive. This has been there forever and ever and ever. The doctors don't know about it, and I'm going to explain why. That's really important. Thyroid follows it. You bring your metabolism from basal, hibernating in winter, to incredibly strong, incredibly energetic, and sleeping for 6 hours in the summer. The sleep bit is the only part that Walter Stump didn't write. So I actually call this guy up and say, Dr. Stump, I need to talk to you about this. Has anybody written about sleep and vitamin D? And he says, no, but it makes perfect sense because you want to sleep less in the summer because you're working and doing things. You want to sleep more in the winter. In fact, as soon as you go back into the literature of what happened before electricity, we all slept for 14 hours. When there was no light, you went to bed early. They're in there from 4 p.m. until 6 a.m. You hope that they're going to sleep because they're driving you nuts, but also you have no food for them. They get one little piece of dried meat a week. That means if they sleep, they stay all covered up, they conserve their energy. The children who can eat one little dry piece of meat a week and put on fat, that means you can go out in the spring, in February, and make it until the food becomes available in April. That message has been intertwined in our biology forever. We're just like bears. They put on strength in the beginning of the spring. As they eat more, as the D goes down, they put on more fat, they climb in a hole, and they hibernate. Unfortunately, we have been living in the last 30 years in constant winter as far as our body is concerned. Not only do we feel grumpy, and as though it's been a long winter, when did the antidepressants become epidemic? Same time frame, late 70s, early 80s. So let's talk about why none of us know about this. From my point of view, what this implies is this may be the reason why we have an epidemic of sleep disorders, not just sleep apnea. And I love the fact that Dr. Perkins prepared you for the idea it's not oxygen. Sleep disruption. And there are many different ways that sleep's abnormal, but my concept is that it's happening really in one place that has always managed the timing of the sleep, how long you stay to sleep, how you knew, and there's all this interaction between when the sun goes down and when the brainstem starts to tell you to go to sleep. The pineal gland that he was referring to has this light perception, so there's this very complicated system that tells you exactly, oh, what season is it and when should I start to go to bed? People do sleep differently at the equator. They stay up longer and they don't change their sleep cycle when they live at the equator. They stay about the same cycle. We, as we go up north, we sleep longer in the winter. As soon as air conditioning becomes available in all the developed world, we're not stupid. It's 100 degrees outside, we go inside. We sit in the air conditioning. We make an air conditioner for our tractor. So even people who have an outdoor life, they don't go out there and stand around when it's 110 degrees in August and say, hey, wow, this is great. So why did this happen? Unfortunately, there was one little mistake that happened. Vitamin. Vitamin in the 1980s became a code word for, oh, that stuff, nutrition for lesser humans, dietitians, female, somewhat below us doctors, male doctors in the 70s. So we don't pay any attention to vitamins anymore. Nutrition is now delegated. It's not sexy anymore. There's really one guy who does D in this whole country. One guy, Michael Hollick. He writes the only textbook. In this year's edition, he says it's a nutrient. This guy can't get his head around Walter Stumpf's articles. He doesn't think the same way. He doesn't like what Walter says, so he doesn't let him publish his articles. Dr. Stumpf has several articles published in the 80s about peer review and his feelings about that. Most of his articles are published in European journals. And it turns out that most of the really good stuff about D is breaking through into the regular journals. I'm going to show you a bunch of them. But most of the good stuff happens in Denmark, Finland, Norway, Sweden, Canada, High North. They know their societies are failing because of this, and they don't have to go through the peer review of Michael Hollick. Because if he doesn't think the way I think, I don't get my article published. These are all the things that are listed, already published in peer-reviewed journals as being epidemiologically related to vitamin D deficiency. Same list that Chuck Perkins showed you for sleep apnea and sleep disorders. Here's all the stuff that's related to the GI tract. Every person I see is on 4 medicines. By February, after I came back in January, I thought, this is the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me in medicine. I cannot believe that everybody who walks in here has this one thing. I've thought it was normal to be on 4 medicines by the time you're 40. A little something for reflux, a little something for maybe a little hypertension, an antidepressant, something for sleep. Those are the things that normal people take. We are now in a society for the last 30 years that it's normal to take 4 pills by the time you're 30. Our teenagers take a lot of pills. Why is that? This vitamin D, if we make it from cholesterol, there's a cholesterol connection there somewhere. There's a lot of debate in the literature of how directly this is related, but it's related in some way. When the statin lowers the cholesterol on my skin, oh, does it? Yes, it turns out that when you lower the cholesterol in your body, the raw material to make vitamin D goes down too. That means even if you do go out in the sun, you probably don't make the same amount of vitamin D as you did before. A couple of connections to statins. We also have the active enzyme that makes what we call the active vitamin D. So the active vitamin D that does its work, that goes into the cell, is called 125-OH. Every place you have that enzyme that takes 25 to 125, we assume that's where it's active. We have that on our skin. That means these elderly people whose skin is all trashed, if they're on a statin, perhaps that statin is keeping them from making this chemical that's there to protect your skin. Now there's lots of basic science articles. Take a skin cancer cell, grow it in a petri dish, put vitamin D in there, it acts like a normal cell. The D goes into the nucleus and makes that cell stop reproducing inappropriately. It turns out that many inflammatory connections, all of the bone marrow components, have vitamin D receptors. White blood cells in particular. There's a whole body of literature of all the autoimmune disorders are linked to vitamin D deficiency. But interestingly, from the cardiology point of view, knee replacement, shoulder replacement, hip replacement. Why do all these patients that you guys take care of in the hospital who have heart disease, hypertension, diabetes also have knee replacement, rotator cuff surgery? It's not by coincidence. They come from a similar origin. Not only is the knee still moving during sleep, but the white blood cells are completely insane now. They're in there chewing away at the joint lining instead of replacing and repairing it. Most important part about that is all these vitamin D receptors that are all over these other organs, our body is still organized to work totally differently in the 8 hours while we're sleeping. We are organized to use our body while we're awake and repair it during sleep. That means everything switches over. What I'm going to try to teach you is the reason why we haven't gotten the next part, which is let's make the disease better with the D, is you have to get the sleep better before the D effects become obvious. So the sleep part is really important. All of these have articles behind them that show that they're epidemiologically related to vitamin D deficiency. Here's why it got called a vitamin by mistake. In the 1930s, the kids come in, their legs hurt, the doctors have a new toy, the x-ray machine. Everybody's getting x-rays. They're x-raying their feet, they're x-raying their legs, they're x-raying everything because they have this new toy. The kids come in with leg pain, I think, because they're kicking at night, because I see kids who come in to see me with leg pain and they're kicking at night. They don't have osteoporosis. They're kicking at night and their legs hurt when they wake up.